Good morning, everyone who were able to get up in time to be here. We had a nice working group yesterday afternoon on, let's say, the simple way of organizing. What do you need from an organization like a NOC, a network of knowledge, where some national, European and global organizations, networks represented, such as NEFO and the Mountain NGO from Italy, the European ones as IALE, Euromarine, and a business organization, and some global networks, GeoBond, CWEB, IPBES, and INGE. So these were the groups, and they presented from their experience, their background, for what they think that is important. And I have 5 points here. Quality control of data and knowledge, that's a key issue for all of them. The quality assurance and quality control, because you cannot be trusted as an organization, as a network, and your assessments cannot be trusted if you don't have good quality information. That's what you need. A network should also be user-friendly to access it and to work with. So people should be able to come into the network and make use of the services of the network. The reward that people get from a NOC, or a network of knowledge, or their own networks, is the incentives. That can be a financial incentive, financial rewards, the recognition as a scientist, or as a researcher, or as a professional, and recognition as an expert in general, and the recognized publications that you get from it. One of the very important aspects is also that there should be openness, accessible resources, and accessible for participation. The network of knowledge needs therefore to be open platforms, an open platform. The represented networks state in general that they would like to have a say in such a network of knowledge, and to organize this, the network of knowledge, surely would need some organizational support, like a small secretariat. I think in the other presentations we come back to this secretariat, the organization. And there should be a kind of representativeness. The organization of the NOC should have representativeness of the organizations that participate in it, or the institutes that participate in it. This can partly be organized by let's say, a steering committee and a council, because if there are many organizations, then you cannot all have the same say. You have to organize it through a kind of hierarchical network, but with a say for everyone. You have to ensure that the organization is accepted and still representing the interests of the participants. This is an issue that requires more thinking, as not only research, but also other European organizations with practical other information and other knowledge should want to participate, such as the European landowners, forestry organizations, and other marine organizations, for instance, could play a role as well. And that's a thing to be elaborated further. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Just stay a little bit. Okay. I know it's a bit early, but do you have any questions for the first minimal option for a network? No?
Karsten. That's close.
No, just as an addition, I think this was a very, very important and interesting exercise, and we will somehow continue this afternoon after the speed presentations with everybody, so that everybody can reflect about the contributions and benefits that everybody can get from the net. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, I don't know how many of the reporters are in the room. Do we have the group 2? Yeah. Yeah? Thank you. So this is about the technical approaches within the networking option.
Okay, so thanks very much. I'm Sandy Knapp. I'm from London. What we did is we focused on thinking about this as a network of networks and not about how you would structure it or how it would be organized necessarily. We focused very, very clearly on the question of what would we, both from our network perspectives and our own personal perspective, consider to be useful and actually make us use such a network. And in a way, it's really hard to consider that from an institutional perspective, because a user of anything is not an institution, it's an individual. So we very quickly went back to thinking about the individual perspective, which I think in the end is probably going to be more fruitful. So we had a few overarching characteristics of a technical system that would support a network of networks. One of which is the knowledge that actually that such a thing existed, and it was there both to use and to ask questions of. So actually visibility is a very important characteristic. We also thought that it was important to have personalized interfaces, which I'll come back to a little bit later, so that so it wouldn't be something so generic that someone going into it would be confused about what they would need it for. We felt that it needed to be a single entry point, again, the single entry point, but also that this needed to be technically an aggregator. So it wasn't something that required a huge amount of effort to put together, that it needed to be an aggregator of information that was already out there, a technical aggregator of information. And the last overarching characteristic that we came up with, that we felt that this needed to be absolutely visibly broad and open, so that it wasn't seen as just the usual crowd of networks and the usual crowd of people operating, because if it looks like that, then no one new will come into the network of networks, and that would defeat the purpose entirely. So what would be the technical aspects of such a network that had those overarching characteristics? The first would be that you would be able to find out about people. So you'd be able to find out about individual people who were working in biodiversity knowledge generation around Europe, but that you could also find out about projects and what kinds of projects were being thought of and what kinds of networks already existed. And it would be a place where you could use this to make contact with others, not only in the virtual space, but also to make contact with others to set up face-to-face meetings. And that's kind of not a technical thing, but the point was reiterated that had been reiterated previously in the past 2 days, is that face-to-face meetings are really, really important for building contacts and networks. The other thing that would be important technically about that network would be that it would be a way of finding out about knowledge. So it could be a place of finding knowledge, which of course stands to reason because that's what the whole point of the thing is, but that it could be somewhere where you could aggregate publications and could be an organizing space in which you as a user could aggregate publications and organize them for a way in which you would want to use them. It could be a finder of publications. If you think about the ecosystem of places to aggregate things currently out there. There's ResearchGate, there's Researcher ID, there's Google Scholar, there's Thomson ISI. There's a whole ecosystem of technical tools, none of which connect to another. They're all completely independent. And so an aggregator which pulled together publications from places like that would be an incredibly useful thing. It would also be a really good place to perhaps post grey literature for the rest of the community to find. So not only pulling from somewhere else, but a way of individual users posting things onto such a technical network. The third sort of thing that would be important about such a technical system would be that it would be about communication, that it would deliver information to a user. Now, how a thing would do that is actually a little bit difficult. That you would be alerted for relevant news and activity. And the way we thought of this is, for example, if you had an aggregator of publications and you could tag those publications with terms, if someone put one of those publications into their workspace and started to use it for something, you, as someone who was interested in that, could be alerted to that. So that's the kind of thing that we meant. And that it would also have on it solutions to problems and a series of use cases that would be of broad use to the community. And the last thing that would be important about such a technical solution, a technical way of connecting a network of networks, is that it could reveal gaps. So by non-use of things, you could reveal gaps in research or reveal gaps in projects or reveal gaps in all sorts of other things. Now, setting up anything technical requires somebody to do it. Technical solutions to things don't just appear out of the ether. So that it requires an initial one-time investment, but we had a certain amount of disagreement about whether or not communities could maintain things like that. Some of us felt that they could, and some of us felt that they couldn't, that there was experience that this didn't work, and others of us felt there was experience that this did work. So I think there's a diversity of opinion out there, and how that, I think something that's maintained by the community becomes a community tool, as opposed to something that's maintained by a top-down, bottom-up. So there needs to be a balance between those things. And the last thing that thought is that to make this work, you can't start something empty. You can't start a technical solution to anything or a technical way of doing something completely empty. So it needs to be seeded with networks. Now there's a slight issue there in that if you seed it with networks, then it looks like the same old players. So that really needs to have some thought. If this is a technical way of making something useful to somebody, it needs to be seeded, but it needs to be seeded with care and thought. So that's all.
Thank you. That was very interesting. If you can stay just a few minutes. Do you have any questions regarding this very interesting approach about technical aspects in the network? Oh, I think you need more coffee.
Come on, people need more coffee. Ask questions. I mean, one of the things that's clear to us is that any kind of technical solution has to have someone to build it, and it also has to have someone to maintain it. And so there are solutions out there where things are maintained by communities, but there's always investment behind that. But the more invisible it is, the more the community buys into it.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick question. Have you discussed already existing types of networks in other fields and disciplines that we could inspire from?
we did sort of. There's different ways of doing this. We kind of got very detailed on what would make things useful to us, because that was kind of the question that we were asked to look at.
Yeah.
So doing a survey of networks, there's lots of them out there. Not just in biodiversity, but in all kinds of other fields, in physics and in mathematics, and all kinds of places there are networks of networks, many of which have technical solutions for maintaining them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just have a quick question. I was just wondering whether you discussed any examples of these sort of technological approaches where the community was very much the driver of it, or at least the continuation.
Well, I mean, I had one from my experience, but I don't want to kind of, advocate that in particular. I mean, there's another EU project which started with EDIT, which is one of these networks, and then continued on in another EU project, which is called Vibrant, which developed a tool called scratch pads, which are, people think of them as being taxonomic, but they're not. More than half of the scratch pads are non-taxonomic in nature. And they're a tool that a community can build something and then maintain it themselves. And what's very interesting about that experiment is that this tool is provided, and there's a certain amount of technical support behind it, but a community is responsible for their own scratch pad. So their own scratch pad develops. And there are more than 2,000 scratch pads now out there. And some of them are very successful, some of them have communities of 2, and some of them have communities of networks. So they vary hugely, and those are maintained entirely by the communities that do them.
And do you know any sort of studies that have looked at those different approaches and how they've been? Okay, interesting.
No one's really. I think it seems to me. I mean, this is my own experience, so I probably shouldn't. This is my opinion and not the opinion of the group. Mm-hmm. Is that we're still at a very evolutionary stage in these technical developments. It's still very evolutionary, and people are trying out all kinds of different things. And it seems to me that what will happen, as happened, with the naming of plants and animals, is that eventually natural selection will select that one which is most used by people, which will become something that happens. I mean, that's how we got binomial nomenclature for plants and animals. So it's a very similar process, as natural selection works on solutions as well.
Okay. Well, that's a nice way to conclude. Okay, so the next group. So Horst, are you reporting? So this group was looking into the aspect of research strategy development.
Good morning. I hope my brain is functioning, that I can explain you. Well, the last 2 days I have posed some critical questions, but this time I'm the opposite. I'm quite thrilled with what we have come up with, and also building up of the work of others before. Now we are dealing with the next level, which would mean a platform, which is a much more structured body than, or how bodies relate to each other than the network, what was dealt with in the first two groups. And we were asked three questions. The one is, what is the absolute minimum input to go beyond the status quo? So, but many of you may not know what the status quo is because you're not long enough in the field. I'm going to explain you in a moment. Then the second one is from there at building blocks. So what else do we need to go in the advanced stage, and then to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of that. And so what is the status quo? Since for many years, there is already the request or the idea from the Commission, already phrased in the EU biodiversity strategy from 2006, so it's already a few years ago, that they wanted to have this sort of science policy advisory body. But nobody knew so far how this were going to work or come into existence. Because we have a lot of bodies and networks and projects working on that end, on doing some or the other sort of policy advice. And just to name a few, it's BiodiversityKnowledge, it's Alternet, it's MARBEF, it's LifeWeb, it's the EPBRS. And for quite a while there was also the idea, who is going to take the lead? And I think a few of those were, especially the stronger and more formalized ones, or more platforms that were watching each other carefully, who's going to take the lead and take over. And so this was the situation, what was started off, and also when the Commission decided to have this call for the GNU project, to think about how this could be solved. And just a few weeks ago, there was a meeting of a smaller group with representatives from the European Platform of Biodiversity Research Strategy and from a few other partners like Alternet and MARBEF. And they have thought and discussed what this new entity or new platform could look like. And I think they have, for quite a while, I was explained, they have discussed how can they come up with a new network. And I think the breakthrough came at that moment when they decided we don't need a new network, we can just build on the already existing networks. And then get things in a logical order and use the strengths of all this already existing bodies, organizations, and networks. And for example, the EPBRS, the European Biodiversity, or the European Platform of Biodiversity Research Strategy, is already quite close to policy, because we have the links to the Nature Directors meeting, where we are invited to the YP meetings in Brussels and have close contacts, and this would make a sort of a foundation of the plenary meeting with representatives of countries, and being from both sides, from the science and from the policy side, and they would look into the more general needs for new research and recommend to funding bodies what new research is needed, but also taking into account the bottom-up ideas that come from the networks when they identified the gaps. So then the other body, which is important, would be a secretariat that is the link between these different entities. And the third big group would be the networks or the research projects. And we have also quite a number of big EU research projects that have in their requirements or work packages also science policy interface and science policy advice. And so this is the status quo. We have a lot of this sort of individual bodies, each doing executing their tasks. but this is not really in a coherent manner. And so after they had come up with this sort of draft structure, we used that as a starting and an entry point for our discussion. And we found with this, the absolute minimum, or what do we need to get better than what we already have, is we need a strong secretariat. We think we need a strong secretariat because a lot of the work may rely on the secretariat. When the demands come in, they have to contact the networks, they have to really phrase the questions that they are operational, they have to edit the reports, they have to go for peer review and processes and so. And so we thought that this secretariat at an initial stage, it's not the end, at the initial stage would have to have at least 4 to 5 people, maybe even some additional support staff. So, and this also depends on the activity, on the number of questions that come in. And this secretariat also should be proactive, going to the networks and challenging them and creating questions that then goes to the decision makers, but also inviting them to ask questions to the networking. So there's also a lot of outreach, and this secretariat should therefore also have communication experts. And it's also necessary to buy-in of the network actors. That means especially a lot of these already existing networks. But we seem to be on very good track because, first of all, this draft structure has been developed together with the others. So, and this was also very, very good because there was not a sort of a competition between the networks, who is going to take the lead. But each one has got his or her role in the whole picture. And so far, to all the partners or potential partners that this draft structure has been presented, they were quite, I would say, excited or very, very positive about this, and this is the way to deal with it. And also, what needs to be done, it needs to get an NGO structure, and needs to be a sort of a legal entity. So there has to be some registered NGO in some place to make contracts with the Commission and maybe others. So, and what is the building blocks? Again, I have touched it already. We need this secretariat, which should be a little bit bigger than just one person or a half a person somewhere on the side. We need a reasonable budget, which should be stable for quite an extended period of time, so not from one year to another, already begging for some minimum amount. There was also some specific idea to bring in volunteers and students to get them involved, and also for that to have some capacity building, and that this secretariat or the whole process should have an ambassador or a champion, like that was presented in the TEEP study, that you have one person like Pavan Sukhdev, where the whole thing is with associated and who will represent this body to the outside. So the strengths and weaknesses, I will start with a short list of weaknesses. This is the need for the budget. 2 minutes is lots of time. A need for a stable and quite extensive budget. And there's also the weakness that we have to watch that we do not overload the secretariat with tasks. Oh, this is a good idea.
I should have asked to turn off the cell phones.
Is this part of my 2 minutes? Sorry. And the weakness is also the inclusiveness. So far, we have not reached out to other to learn societies, European Ecological Society, Society of Restoration Ecology, Society of Ecological Economics. There's certainly more around, and we also try to get them on board, and because they have thousands of members that could also contribute individually or as a society to the process. So the strength again is inclusiveness, but this is a rather more limited inclusiveness, which is because it seems to be that all the big networks in the field of biodiversity, like Biodiversity, Alternet, Marbev, LiveWeb, are already on board, and this is already a very, very good starting point. We have a clear structure with clear tasks, so everybody knows what to do and what the role is. It should be independent. It's because of the NGO structure that is foreseen, and so independent of complete. And it's also building on existing structures. So we are not reinventing the wheel or creating a completely new structure, but rather building on taking the building blocks and bringing them together to a bigger, new level. It should be flexible to answer questions in a flexible manner, because we have all these networks with their specialities. If a request comes more on the marine side, then it will certainly go rather to Marbev than to others, and so on. And capacity building is included and should be included. Okay, with that, I run out of my time, and maybe some of the group may add something.
Thank you, Horst. Thank you. And it's nice to see you enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So anyone would like to ask questions or comments or add something? Christophe?
Only one short question. Have you discussed the question of the mandate of such a new platform?
Well, the mandate is because we have already the EPBRS. So we're building on that structure, which is already there, which has a mandate, or sort of a mandate. It's also, but we're close to policy. And others, the networks then will volunteer to come in, but it seems to be that they're very, very positive about this. Or Jürgen, have you got any other insight in that?
I have the impression that more and more the mandate is growing, because the different networks which are involved at present, and I'm inviting others who are not yet involved and which are interested to give a sign either to me, to Horst, or to someone else. And let's say at the moment that you can bring your scientific community together, it's your community itself who is giving a mandate at a certain level from guys, we are able to do this. And what I think is a very strong point of the proposal we have discussed yesterday is that we can do that in an independent way without asking for money outside of those networks to start everything up. That too is a very strong signal to the outside community that the science community is now taking up a responsibility and is ready to jump.
Well, that's a very positive message. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to take more questions, despite the fact it's really interesting. But we have already almost 8 minutes of delay on the schedule. So I'd like to call up the reporter for the fourth group. So it was also related to the platform option, but I think we split the group in two. So you are first group 4, and we'll have a second group 4, right?
Does it mean we only have 2.5 minutes each?
Yeah, you have very few minutes.
Right. Well, I can be very quick, because
Okay.
I think much of what our group has been discussing has already been presented by the previous speakers. I think especially what Horst has been presenting just now is reflecting to a very large extent what this group looked at. We looked at mostly on this issue of how to link the policy, but ended up pretty much into discussing a governance structure which very much reflects this composition, which was already in the white paper as well. Some basic principles came up, which are the same kind of being independent. We need a kind of an independent body When we talked about bodies, we kind of came up with all kinds of names and semantics. I will not go into that, but it's like secretariat was felt to be a bit heavy, so we talked then about a technical support unit and so on, but in the end it's all about names. It's the functions that matter, and indeed we agreed we need a kind of, as a function, a strong entry point, secretariat, technical support unit, to manage the administration, to manage the incoming requests, to do a kind of first kind of filtering of any request coming in, including the step 1 in the white paper on looking whether the answer is to be found in BICE, in the Biodiversity Information System for Europe. And then kind of after that filtering, it would hand over the requests which come out of the filter to a KCB, the coordinating body, the body which is composed of a number of people. We didn't decide or suggest how many that should be. A number of people that look at the remaining requests more from the side of how do we deal with the requests, who should be involved, so that the people in the knowledge coordination body should have, on one side, there should be a kind of millipedes. On one side, they should be connected to scientific communities of all kinds, because any request coming in can be on any subject. But at the same time, they should be very good coordinators and managers and process managers, actually, knowing how to deal with this process of leading on a request. They would prioritize requests as well. And we felt that this KCB should consist of permanent members, not necessarily be integrated in the secretariat. There was some discussion on that, whether it should be part of it or not. But for sure, the member should be permanently accessible, because requests may come in at any time, and there's no kind of point in then saying, well, you have to wait for 2 months because that's when the KCB meets. That all is kind of part of the minimal setup. We feel the secretariat and a coordinating body is the minimum that is required. We did not go to the extent of linking with networks. I think that's a great addition, because it would strengthen very much this entire process. We did talk about a lot of other networks, and in some way we did have a kind of a dual position there. On one side, we said, well, the aim should not be for this NOC to become IPBES European Hub, but at the same time we said, well, let's be inspired by IPBES, and we always kind of drifted to how is it done by IPBES? Can we do something similar? And then we went back, no, we are independent. We should be doing things differently, because you don't know what will happen with this NOC. So that was a bit of an undecided component in there. Also, when talking about this minimum version, say the light NOC, we did not resolve the issue of legal status, but agreed that there should be some kind of legal entity, whether it's an association or an NGO or something, but it should have the power to handle things formally. And there was also discussion on who decides in the end. Who decides who is in the KCB, who decides where, and who is in the secretariat. So the decision-making body was not kind of fixed. And then also there is this relation to existing platforms, the ones mentioned by Horst and others, but also existing structures with an existing mandate, like there is the European Environment Agency, like there is the Joint Research Center. So how does this NOC relate to these existing structures? Then we went on to this additional building blocks, the version B, the heavy, if you like, or a heavier version, where a suggestion was made for a decision-making body in terms of a General Assembly or a user board. This would probably be the body which has a stronger possibility for involving policymakers as well, because we felt that would be a kind of a body overlooking the entire process, looking at the composition of the KCB and so on. So more the decisions on the process. These would have members, perhaps paying a fee. Also that we didn't resolve, because it's of course pros and cons to paying a fee. I'll be very quick now. Then once that General Assembly would be established and it would be chaired by a champion, then there would also be kind of the need for working groups dealing with specific components of of the network, say communications, kind of some of the process-related work items, but also some of the content-related issues. And then finally we felt, well, if you really get to a further stage, you might need annual meetings, Biodiversity Knowledge Conference 3, and so on and so forth, a General Assembly every year. So very much reflecting what was discussed.
It's very nice to see that actually you're really combining with the previous presentation some very practical suggestions for operationalization of this thing. Well, I can take one question. So if someone wants to have a clarification with Ben, quickly. No, you can also, I mean, of course, everything we're doing here is very short, but we have a full reporting of all those breakout groups discussion in the report of this conference. So very quickly, do we have a reporter for the second group 4? And I'm going to have to ask you to be like this amazing, synthetic, fast reporter.
Most has been said already. Good morning, everybody. Ole Ostermann from the Joint Research Center. So we had the second part of this policy support perspective, and as in the first screening, it came up that there might be some similarities between the NOC and the IPBES. We were working on the similarities and differences with the IPBES, of which we established a pretty nice table on several criteria. I will, of course, not go through all these, but one point to raise is, for example, the process of producing output, and that is felt to be in the NOC to be as a structured methodological approach as a starting point, a kind of a bottom-up scientific approach, whether in the IPBES it is seen as the government structure, which is the starting point, and then the methodological part to be discussed later. Also, the context is different. The UN context is much more loose, whereas in Europe, with the institutions, with the biodiversity strategy, we have a kind of framework already in which we can evolve. Then another bunch of questions has been towards the funding, of course, and it was very clear that more funding would generate more output, so it was pretty clear. But where we insisted also was on the terminology of the requesters for scientific questions or policy questions, who provide the topic and the questions that are related to biodiversity. Then we have the mandator, the body that provides the moral authority or the legitimacy to the NOC, and another structure being the funder or the donor who provides the resources. Of course, the same body can be 1, 2, or 3 of them, but they can be completely distinct. And that was, I think, an important point to underline. So many points like flexibility and so on have been mentioned. So I think I will stop here and leave to my colleagues of the group whether they want to add a very particular point. Thank you.
Thank you, Oli. Very nice and very quick.